Welcome, everyone. My name is Suzanne Pichetti Johnson. I'm the program manager for Avenues to Wellness, and we are a community-based wellness program of the Frank R. Howard Foundation. Today, I am very proud to introduce our guest speaker, Lindsey Painter from Redwood Community Services. And she's going to be speaking on the very timely topic of compassion fatigue. Thank you so much for being here today, Lindsey. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome.
Okay, well, thank you very much for having me today. Today we're going to be talking about vicarious trauma and compassion fatigue. But before we get into that, I wanted to let you know that the training department at Redwood Community Services has a whole list of trainings that we provide for free to the community. So here are a few of the trainings. This is not a comprehensive list, but these are some of our most popular trainings that we offer at the training department. So you can see compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma is one of our top trainings. We also have trainings supporting LGBTQ youth in care. We have Native youth in care, collaborative problem solving. We've got our CSEC training, crisis communication, and some various other ones there. Motivational interviewing is another popular one. And then we have, on the last bullet point there, a series called Caregiving with High Needs that addresses very common issues that you might run into when you're working with a high needs child. So we have one on aggressive behaviors, sexualized behaviors, tantrums and meltdowns, and one on withdrawn behaviors. So we do offer all of these trainings and more, and we are very excited to be able to offer these trainings to our Mendocino, Lake, and Humboldt County communities. So if you are in Lake, Mendocino, or Humboldt counties and you would like a free training on mental health, please contact us. So there are actually two ways that you can attend an RCS training. The first way is we offer trainings virtually to the community. So all you have to do is sign up and show up on your computer, and we will have a live trainer there to train you virtually. So there is our website, redwoodcommunityservices.org. If you scroll to the bottom, there's a training tab, and you click on that, and there you're going to find the calendar with all of our trainings and links that you can click on that will help you register for the trainings. The other way that you can access free trainings is if you work for an organization that serves children and families, all you need to do is email trainingdepartment@redwoodcommunityservices.org, or you can call our number, 707-467-2010, extension 1414, and we would be very happy to come provide an in-person training to your organization of your choice at the time that you choose. So please, we are so happy to be providing this mental health information to our community. So please contact us. All right, so let's go ahead and launch into our compassion fatigue training. So we're going to start today by defining compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma. What is it? What is resiliency? And talk a little more about what those mean. We're going to explain the causes of vicarious or secondary traumatic stress, discuss potentially damaging professional and personal effects of secondary stress, how to become resilient in the face of overwhelming and emotionally intense demands, and create strategies to prevent compassion fatigue, accelerate recovery, and self-regulate. I know the words are too tiny for you to read on the little cartoon there, but it says, "The ringing in your ears, I think I can help." And obviously the cow is wearing a bell around her neck. So that's funny because a lot of times when we're working in human services or we're working in some capacity in which we expend a lot of emotional energy, we may start to feel like something's wrong. I don't understand what's wrong with me. But the people in our lives are like, we know what's wrong with you. It's plain as the bell around your neck. You know, you have compassion fatigue and you need to get help. So what is compassion fatigue? Compassion fatigue is kind of a blanket term that covers a lot of other types of things. It is a union of secondary stress and physical and emotional burnout that results from intense service to suffering and vulnerable children and adults. It's not just people in the human services profession that are at risk of developing compassion fatigue. It's really anyone that works with people who are traumatized or in pain on a regular basis. So that includes everyone in human services, it includes everyone in education, it includes everyone in the medical field, and probably some that I'm forgetting. But really, if you are the kind of person who has to expend more emotional energy than you are taking in at your job, then you are at some risk of developing compassion fatigue. It is a union of secondary stress and physical and emotional burnout that results from intense service to suffering and vulnerable children and adults. The emotional residue or strain of exposure to working with those suffering from the consequences of trauma, the cost of caring for others in emotional distress. And it can happen from one acute event. So someone shares their dramatic trauma with you, and you hear that, and you take that trauma into your body. We'll talk more about that later. So that can cause compassion fatigue, or it can happen over time with just the intensity, the longevity of working with people who have experienced pain and trauma. So let's talk about secondary and vicarious trauma. Secondary and vicarious trauma are used interchangeably in the field. So they mean basically the same thing. They mean what happens when you hear about or witness someone else's trauma and then take that trauma into your body as if it were your own. They do have slightly different definitions. The secondary trauma is more about the physical symptoms of trauma that you would develop from being exposed to someone else's trauma. Vicarious trauma is more about how your worldview tends to change when you have been exposed to other people's trauma. For example, if you are a domestic violence counselor, you may start to believe that there is no such thing as a healthy relationship because you've been exposed to so much trauma regarding relationships. But secondary and vicarious trauma, like I said, they're used interchangeably, and it's what happens inside your body when you are exposed to other people's trauma. It's only been recently that we've really done any studies in this area because in the past, it just seemed obvious, like if it's not my trauma, then it's not really affecting me, right? But that's not actually true. Those of us who are exposed to other people's trauma are at risk of developing trauma symptoms ourselves. And so what they've started discovering is that even though we know on a cognitive level that hearing about someone else's trauma isn't the same level of trauma as experiencing it personally, our bodies, the chemical reaction that happens inside our bodies is the same. So they have done studies where they did like a brain scan of a soldier who had returned from war and had developed PTSD. And then they did a brain scan of someone who had been working in human services and was exposed to trauma for a long period of time, and the brain scans were identical. So they had both developed PTSD, even though one of them had experienced primary trauma and the other one had experienced secondary and vicarious trauma. So we need to take secondary and vicarious trauma seriously. It's really affecting us more than we think. And a lot of times people will gaslight themselves a little bit. You know, they'll think, I don't know what's wrong with me. I haven't experienced this trauma, so why am I suffering like this? And the answer is secondary and vicarious trauma. When we take the trauma into our bodies from our clients or our patients or our students or whoever we're working with, our body experiences that as if the trauma happened to us, and then responds to the trauma the same way that all people's body responds to trauma. And we're going to get, again, more into that a little bit later. But secondary and vicarious trauma are something that we should be taking seriously and working to protect ourselves from, and then when we have developed it, work to release it from our bodies. Burnout is another component of compassion fatigue. Burnout is defined as an overwhelming demand of tasks. It's like I have too much to do and not enough time, and I feel stressed out and overwhelmed. The difference between burnout and some of the other factors like secondary and vicarious trauma is that burnout doesn't necessarily have anything to do with trauma or suffering. Burnout is just stress. So anyone can develop burnout, even someone who doesn't use any particular emotional energy in their work. And burnout has a way better prognosis for recovery. You know, a really good restful vacation can help you recover from burnout, not necessarily secondary or vicarious trauma. So here's our little Venn diagram. We've got secondary and vicarious stress and burnout combined, and you can get compassion fatigue. But we also recognize that, I think I saw a study one time that said somewhere between 70 and 90% of Americans have at least one traumatic event in their life. So we're going to presume that most people also have some kind of primary trauma in their life. So when we combine that primary trauma, secondary trauma, and burnout, we have a high risk of developing compassion fatigue. So what causes compassion fatigue? Well, working with adults or children who are victims of trauma or violence is a big one. I would also add pain to that. People who are experiencing trauma or violence or pain, and we are working with them on a long period of time. Having a lack of training in dealing with issues of trauma or violence and its subsequent outcomes. High ideals of making a difference in the lives of children and adults. Personality traits of compassion and empathy. Past histories of trauma or victimization in the worker. Lack of consistent self-care behaviors and habits, and working with large numbers of traumatized or victimized people. So when I do this training in person, I often ask people, when you go down that list, do any of those things describe you? And people are like, well, yeah, I mean, I want to make a difference in the lives of people, and I have compassion and empathy, and maybe I don't do self-care as well as I should. And I'm like, well, then you're at risk of developing compassion fatigue. We are at risk of developing compassion fatigue when we have multiple things on this list. So compassion and empathy, of course, are positive traits that we wish everyone had. I wish everyone had high traits of compassion and empathy. Those are strengths, and we want to encourage them. But they also come with a certain vulnerability. And one of the vulnerabilities is compassion fatigue. We are at risk of being damaged by the people that we work with, not on purpose, but by the people that we work with because we take their trauma and bring it into our own bodies. So what does it look like when someone has developed compassion fatigue? Here are some of the signs and symptoms that you might see from an individual who has developed compassion fatigue. You might see bottled up emotions, feeling helpless and hopeless, a sense that you're not doing enough, isolation from others, substance use to mask feelings, compulsive behaviors such as overspending, overeating, gambling, or sexual addictions, inability to empathize or numbing. That inability to empathize or numbing is very, very common. It's often one of the first signs of developing compassion fatigue. And it can be really scary for people who are working in a job where their job is to empathize with other people, and then they feel worried that they're losing the ability to do their job. We can also see denial of problems or dissociative moments, guilt, fear, anger, recurrence of nightmares or trauma flashbacks, hypervigilance, chronic physical problems such as GI issues, stomach issues, recurring colds, chronic exhaustion or physical ailments, and difficulty concentrating. So again, I ask people when I'm doing this training, have you noticed any of these symptoms in yourself? Have you ever been at a time in your life when you noticed these symptoms in yourself? And so we kind of spend some time reflecting. When are some times when we have felt this way? Then we move to professional impacts at work. So when we are, if you are working with a team of people who have all developed compassion fatigue, which can happen in work environments in which we are constantly working with people who are suffering, and we get very little time for reflection or self-care or team building or kind of building one another up. So here are some of the professional impacts that you might see from a workplace that, a majority of the people have developed compassion fatigue. You have chronic absenteeism, high turnover rates, inability for teams to work well together, constant change in coworker relationships, aggressive or passive-aggressive communication among staff, negativism toward management, inability of staff to respect and meet deadlines or complete assignments and tasks, inability of staff to believe that improvement is possible or a lack of flexibility, friction between staff and management, desire among staff to break company rules, strong reluctance toward change, and a lack of vision for the future. So when I was in my early 20s, I was doing my teacher training, and I worked at a high school for like 12 to 16 weeks, somewhere in there, for my student teaching. And the school that I worked at, it was in Michigan, it's nowhere around here. It was a very negative place to work. The people who worked there had kind of this teachers against students attitude, where they couldn't stand to be around the students. They felt like the students were having so many behavior problems. They were such a pain in the butt, and the teachers didn't want to deal with them. And so they would, every day they would come to staff meeting in the morning, and they'd sit there just defeated, ugh, here we go, into the breach once more. It was the most depressing place I have ever worked. It was so negative. And of course, the students immediately picked up on the fact that they didn't feel supported or didn't feel like the teachers cared about them. And so their behavior problems got worse, which just reinforced the teachers' idea that they were bad. And it was this just never-ending negative cycle. And when I describe things like that in trainings, I have people nodding their head yeah, I've worked at a place like that too. And it's miserable. It is a miserable way to work. And that is what happens when you end up with an entire team of people who have developed compassion fatigue. They are so burnt out. They are carrying so much trauma and suffering inside their bodies that they are unable to do the work of empathizing and supporting the people that they're working with. So when we allow ourselves to get like that, it becomes a problem not just for us, but also for our coworkers and for our clients. We are unable to be effective at helping people when we ourselves have developed compassion fatigue. So let's talk about biology versus mental weakness. We have this idea in our culture. I wish that we could get rid of it. This idea that somehow if I experience trauma, but I just am really strong, that I will get through it and it won't affect me. That idea is totally wrong. The way that we experience trauma in our bodies is biological. Our body responds to things the same way it responds to other types of injuries, right? If I broke my leg, I wouldn't be like, well, I'm really strong, so I can definitely get through this. I don't need help. Our emotions are a biological part of our body the same way that my broken leg is a biological part of my body. And so if trauma has happened to my body, then my body is going to respond to that trauma. It does not matter my mental fortitude. So sometimes I'll see these movies in popular culture, I'm trying to think of some examples like Rambo or John Wick, some of these action heroes, and they experience all this trauma. Sometimes over a series of movies, they experience this intense trauma, but they get through it because they're so tough. And when I watch that, I'm like, you know what? In reality, that guy, he can't sleep at night. He's having nightmares. He's having flashbacks. He needs treatment, And so I wish that we could banish that idea from our culture that somehow needing help is equated to weakness. It is not. Our bodies respond to trauma, and we need treatment in our bodies when we have trauma. So one of the things that we have been learning recently based on research is that trauma lives in a place of in our body that is older than language. It lives in a place in our brain that isn't regulated by our talking. So at Redwood Community Services, we are very supportive of therapy. I personally am in therapy, and several of my children are, and I think everyone should be in therapy. It's super helpful. In addition to therapy, we need to be using some body-based wellness skills in order to release stress and trauma from our bodies. Because the place that trauma lives inside our body is deeper than language, talk therapy can be useful to try to uncover it and try to think through it cognitively, but a lot of times it's in there so deep that we need to do something body-based in order to release it from our body. So I don't know if you've ever done something with your body like yoga or done some type of meditation, and you find yourself like welling up with emotion. You find like tears coming to the surface and you're like, what is going on? That is what happens when we do something with our bodies and we get an emotional release. So that emotional release can be really powerful, and we encourage people to do some body-based skills in addition to their therapy so that they can be kind of targeting trauma from two different ways. They can target trauma from a cognitive level where we discuss it and try to uncover what's going on and reframe and all the good things that we do in therapy. And also we tackle it from a body-based skill place where we can teach our body that we are safe and that it doesn't have to hang on tightly to the trauma that it's holding on inside of our bodies. So a lot of times stressful reactions cannot be talked away, but they can be sensed away by using body-based wellness skills. Before we move into the next section, I do want to say, sometimes when I'm speaking with people who are very busy and overwhelmed, like teachers, medical staff, different positions in human services, I feel like they're going to walk away from this training and think that I'm telling them, I know you're stressed and overwhelmed. What you need is to do more things to take care of yourself. I worry that people are going to think that I'm just giving them one more thing on the to-do list, right? Like, you're feeling really bad. I can see that you're feeling really bad. What you need is to go meditate more. And I don't want people to take that away from this training. The reason that we are at such a high risk of compassion fatigue is because the way that our world is designed, it doesn't protect us from these kinds of things. We are overworked, and we are not, the way our system is designed, it doesn't protect us, the worker. And so because we live in an imperfect system that will not protect us, we have to do extra things to protect ourselves, and it isn't fair. So I want you to know that I'm not saying you need to do more to take care of yourself. What I'm saying is it's not fair that you feel this way, and it's not your fault. But what we want is to give you some tools and strategies so that you can find a way to protect yourself, even though you are part of a system that won't protect you. So I did want to say that before I move further, because I never want people to come to this training and think, oh boy, I have to do one more thing now in order to be healthy. You know, I have to eat vegetables and I have to exercise and now I have to meditate. Thanks, Lindsey. So I do want to add that these are important. It is important that we are able to take care of ourselves, but I do want to say it's not your fault if you're feeling bad. It's the fault of a system that doesn't care for people in their worst times. All right, so regulation and dysregulation, this is pretty common, but I wanted to go over it just briefly. Regulation and dysregulation just mean how you feel when you're calm or focused or relaxed. That would be regulation, and dysregulation is how you feel when you feel bad inside. It's just a blanket term that covers I feel stressed, I feel anxious, I feel depressed, I feel upset, like whatever is happening inside, I feel bad. So that would be dysregulation. So we're going to go over what we call the resilient zone. The resilient zone is where we have the emotional resources to handle whatever is coming our way. So you can see that nice wavy line. That nice wavy line represents I'm feeling different feelings, but I'm inside my emotional capacity to handle it. So I might be feeling a little irritated at a coworker, I might be feeling a little upset, I might be feeling a little sad, but I'm still within my ability to cope with that feeling. Our emotional resources don't just count as things inside ourselves, they also count as people outside of us. So if I'm feeling dysregulated, I call my mom, I talk to my mom, I feel better, I'm back inside my resiliency zone. So any way that we are able to gather emotional resources to cope with how we're feeling would count as being part of our resiliency zone. So here's another graphic with the resiliency zone. You can see our little red lightning bolt there. That represents trauma or intense stress. So when trauma and intense stress happen, it bounces us outside of our resiliency zone. So we have all these emotional resources that we've developed to cope with our feelings, but when we experience trauma, it bounces us outside. So we are now dysregulated outside of our personal ability to cope. If we get bounced high outside of our resiliency zone, then we end up with high energy dysregulation. So we've got edginess, irritability, mania, anxiety, and panic, anger, or pain. Those are some high energy dysregulation experiences. If we get bounced low outside our resiliency zone, then we end up with low energy dysregulation. So low energy dysregulation might be depression, sadness, isolation, exhaustion, fatigue, numbness, and I would add dissociative type things when I feel disconnected from everyone around me. And then as you can see, sometimes we can bounce high or low outside the resiliency zone. So we can be anxious and then depressed, and then we can be angry, and then we can be disconnected. So we have kind of this bouncing inside and outside. Another way to say it is that when we are outside of our resiliency zone, our fight-flight response gets activated. So when the fight-flight response gets activated, our body does all of these things inside to try to either fight off a predator or run away. The way our body was designed, we were supposed to only be in that state for a few minutes at a time, right? I'm a caveman and I'm attacked by a saber-toothed tiger, so I either fight it off or I run away or I die, right? Those are my three choices. And so my body is going to do a whole bunch of things to help me be able to run away or fight. Things like increased heart rate and more tension in the muscles and more blood flow to the muscles. And it's also going to suppress things like my appetite, because when I'm in a survival situation, my body doesn't prioritize digesting food. So that's one of the reasons that when people get stuck outside their resiliency zone, they have trouble with things like sleeping. Your body thinks that you're under attack, so sleeping is not a priority right now. People might have trouble with their stomach. Well, digestion is not a priority when your body thinks you are literally under attack at this moment. And so when we get stuck in our fight-flight response for too long, it starts to do damage to our body. It starts to hurt us. And it hurts us on a physical level and on an emotional level. So we can have both of those going on. So let's talk about COVID. We added some stuff in about COVID recently because COVID has been a global trauma. It has affected every person on earth to varying degrees. So this is a definitely not complete list of some of the things that we have been dealing with over the past 2 years as we have dealt with COVID. So illness, chronic illness, and death of loved ones from COVID, isolation and disconnection from community and personal relationship resources, job loss and loss of financial security, increased workload at work due to short staffing, and if you are an educational professional or a medical professional, then you have seen a huge increase in your workload recently. Increased workload at home due to distance learning, less access to resources, stress from the constant changing safety guidelines and routines, disagreement and stress among family, friends, and coworkers about vaccines and vaccine mandates, fear of getting sick, going out, socializing, and now we're facing going back to the office after having worked from home for a long period of time. All of those things are very stressful to varying degrees depending on how many of them and how intense we have reacted to them. But really, when I think about this, I think about how basically everybody in the last 2 years has experienced this trauma, and we as a general people are not doing okay. I don't know if you've experienced like going to the grocery store, driving on the road, you notice that people are more aggressive, they're more angry, they're less patient, they're less willing to listen. And just in general, people are having a harder time because so many of us are outside of our resiliency zones like all the time because of COVID, because it has been so difficult. And there have been many other difficult things in addition to these that have come about kind of indirectly in response to COVID. So people in general are just having a hard time. Here are some of the mental health consequences of COVID. People are less kind, people are less empathetic, people are more irritable, they are more selfish. Therapists and psychiatrists are booked for months. I don't know if you have tried to get in with a therapist or a psychiatrist, but like I called one and they were like, we have an appointment in November. So like they are really booked because so many people are seeking help right now. An increase in anxiety and depression. People's resiliency zones are smaller, so people get kicked out of their resiliency zone quicker and easier. And poor concentration and memory problems. Those are just, again, a few of the things that we might see as a result of people being outside their resiliency zone as a collective group for too long. So what can help? Well, one of the things that can help is years of experience. I kind of want to talk about that for a minute because one of the reasons that people who are seasoned in these professions end up lasting for so long is because they learn how to create, I haven't yet figured out the perfect language for it, but some kind of permeable barrier between their emotions and the emotions of their client, student, or patient. I have a friend who is a nurse trainer. She works in a hospital, and she takes nurses who have just graduated from nursing school and are in a hospital for the first time, and she trains them on the floor. And one of the things that she really tries to get across to her new nurses is that you aren't helping your patients more by diving into their pain. When you pull that pain inside your body, like we've been talking about before with the pain and trauma, when you pull that stuff into your body, it doesn't help you be a better nurse. It doesn't help you help them more. They don't need that from you. What they do need is for you to continue to be empathetic and compassionate and helpful to them in the most practical ways. And so that is one of the reasons why years of experience is up there, because people who last a long time in these professions are the people who learn how to create that barrier to protect themselves. And of course, it's not perfect. Even people who are seasoned sometimes get that one person that just really hits them, just right where it hurts. And that is a sign that we still have good empathy and compassion. But learning how to have that balance where we can have empathy and compassion and care deeply about our clients without doing that thing where we bring that pain into our bodies, that is one of the things that we can do to protect ourselves. Particularly people who are brand new in the profession, they're just brimming over with empathy and compassion. I train new hires at RCS, and we get people through there that are just the most wonderful people who just can't wait to go out there and make a difference. And I always worry about those people because they are the best exact kind of people that we want doing human services, but they are also so vulnerable to pulling all of that trauma into their bodies if they aren't careful, if they don't take the steps to protect themselves. So if you find yourself working in a profession like this, see if you can find that balance. You can create that little barrier around your heart so that you can protect yourself from your clients or your students or your patients' pain and suffering. Having a healthy work-life balance is another thing that's really important in order for us to be able to protect ourselves from compassion fatigue. And this is, of course, easier said than done, right? This is probably not the first time in your life that you've heard someone tell you that you need to have a good, healthy work-life balance, right? And I know people, I have a good friend who works at the homeless shelter in Ukiah. And sometimes when it's really cold outside or when it's raining or when it's really hot outside, he has trouble relaxing. He has trouble eating food. He has trouble because he knows that his clients are out there in that weather and that it must be miserable and even possibly dangerous for them. And it makes it hard for him to be able to enjoy his life. But what what we try to remind people is that you aren't helping your clients more by sitting at home being miserable. They aren't being helped by that. So again, it's not an easy thing to do, but it is something that we should try to be striving toward. We should try to be able to enjoy the things about our life so that we can restore ourselves. I sometimes think of my emotional capacity like my cell phone battery. I remember a couple years ago when they had that PG&E power outage that lasted like 5 or 6 days. And it was really hard to keep my phone charged. I had to go in my car and turn it on and plug it in. But I was really intentional because my phone is important to me. I wanted to know what was going on. And so I think of my emotional capacity in the same way. If I expend too much of my emotional energy and I don't do anything to recharge myself, my battery is going to be depleted. And then when someone needs me, I won't have it. My emotional reserves are gone. And so I try to remind myself that it is important for me to take the time to recharge my battery in whatever way that looks for me. Having social support is really important. Therapy, again, very important. Stress reduction techniques and improved supervision. We want to develop a therapeutic community. We want to have people in our lives, particularly people in our work lives, who are going to reach out to us, lift us up, and validate our self-care habits, hold us accountable for our self-care, support our sense of resilience, not allow us to isolate, nurture us, and delightfully immerse us in humor. So really having someone in our life that cares enough about us that will hold us accountable for self-care. And I sometimes like to use the word nosy. I want a friend that's nosy enough that's going to be like, are you taking care of yourself, Lindsey? You look tired. Tell me, when's the last time you did self-care? What are you doing for yourself? Okay, so now you need to go home and do this to take care of yourself. So we want friends like that. We want people in our lives that care about us enough to make sure that we are continuing to care for ourselves and recharge our emotional battery. Another part of self-care is boundary setting. And I remember the first time I saw this, it really clicked in my brain. I was like, I've never thought about boundary setting as a facet of self-care, but it really is so important. So again, there's that separation between work and home, changing out of work clothes. My nurse friend that I was talking about, she comes home and she changes out of her scrubs and puts on she calls them her civilian clothes, her civvies. And I used to say well, aren't scrubs the most comfortable clothing ever invented? Don't you want to hang out in your scrubs? And she says, well, yeah, but I feel like I'm at work when I'm wearing them. So she would rather put on clothes that are slightly less comfortable, but that help her feel like that separation between being at work and being at home. Debriefing before leaving, keeping work and home activities separate, lock up the office on Friday. I really encourage people to use the mute feature on their phone. And this doesn't just apply to work, right? We can do it for work, but also for those people in our lives. We all have people in our lives that sometimes can be an emotional drain, and we care about them and we want to be there for them, but it is okay for you to tell your phone, I don't need to hear from this person for the next 4 hours. So I really encourage you, use that feature. It can really help you when you need some restorative time. And don't check your work phone or email when you're home, if at all possible. Okay, so next is body-based techniques. Now, normally, if I were doing this training in person, we would spend the next 45 minutes to an hour going over these different techniques and practicing them, which is why you should definitely call me and have me come to you so that I can do these techniques with you, because it's really fun. But it doesn't really work in this setting, so I'm just going to talk about them with you. Any type of body-based technique that is going to tap into the stress and trauma in your body is going to be useful for you. So yoga is one that works for me. It might work for you too. I think it's really powerful. There's a lot of other ones too. I know Tai Chi and Pilates, there's quite a few body-based exercises that also tap into a mindfulness element. Progressive muscle relaxation. I really love progressive muscle relaxation for when I'm stressed and tense and I'm trying to go to sleep. It's one of the most relaxing ones. So you do progressive muscle relaxation by going through different parts of your body, and you tell that part of your body to tense. So like I would start with my feet and move up. So I would tell my feet to tense, and I would count to 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then take a deep breath. And then release my breath and the tension. And then I would move to my calves, and then I would move to my upper legs, and so on, all through my body. And you would kind of do this quietly, focusing on your breathing and imagining all of that stress and tension that is being held in your muscles just draining into the earth. So that's a really good one. And you can Google progressive muscle relaxation, and there's tons of great like guides you can read as you go through. Breathing techniques. Breathing techniques are my usual go-to. When I'm feeling like really stressed or upset, I feel that tightness in my chest. The first thing I tell myself to do is breathe slow and deep. There are multiple different breathing techniques that you can do, but they all focus one way or another on breathing deeply and slowly. So even if you are like in the middle of some kind of panic episode, you can remember to take slow, deep breaths to try to calm your nervous system. Grounding is a really good one, and there are, again, multiple ways that you can ground. But grounding is about connecting yourself to something physical to remind you that you are safe in this space. So I like to go like walking and feel the way that my feet touch the ground. That is a grounding technique for me. I use other types too. And I also have friends who use other things. I know a grounding technique where you like name 5 colors in the room. So you'd be like red, yellow, blue, orange, and kind of like distract yourself a little bit. So kind of redirect your mind away from whatever it's perseverating on. I've seen really great grounding techniques for kids too, like in schools. I saw one time at a school they had handprints all along the wall in the hallway, and if a kid was upset, he would put his hands on the handprints and push his weight on the wall, which is such a great grounding technique for kids. I love it. Trauma tapping is a really good one too, and it's one that I've recently been practicing a little more in my personal life. The one that we use is called the emotional freedom technique. It's based on the same idea as acupuncture, except no needles. It's acupressure, where there's different meridian points in your body where energy flows. And so you would tap on those parts of your body. This is one of them here. You would tap on this part of your body, and then you would say a mantra. And the mantra is something like, even though I have this stress, I deeply and completely accept myself. So you would tap here, and then there's several other tapping places. I'm trying to remember all the exact ones. There's like one here, there's one here, there's one here, 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 and then under here, and then you end on the top of your head. So you would go through, and you would go through like 4 or 5 times. You would do that cycle, tap, and say the mantra to yourself. I recently did this with a 15-year-old I was working with who was having some anxiety, and we practiced it together, saying the mantra out loud and tapping, and we did it 4 or 5 times, and I was even surprised at how powerful the emotional reaction was. About halfway through the 4th time, I started to feel like this well of emotion. I was honestly surprised at the power of it. It's really, really an effective technique. Meditation, of course. There are so many different ways to meditate. You can find some really great ones on YouTube. I've seen those bowls that you can ring the bowl and then listen to the sound. And there's just lots of really different, really innovative modern ways that you can tap into meditation. I know a lot of people are like, oh, meditation, that's not for me. I can't pay attention for the life of me. But the good news about meditation is that if you try it and you do really badly, it's still good for your brain, right? Even if you tried it and you did it for 2 minutes and you're like, man, my brain wandered every second, I couldn't do it. Congratulations, you already got the benefit from it. So even the practice of trying it, even if we don't feel like we were very successful, even that is good for your brain. So I encourage you to try it. It's actually, 2 minutes. It doesn't take very long for you to try to incorporate it into your life somewhere. Like surely somewhere in the course of your day, you can fit 2 minutes in where you can breathe deeply and center your thoughts. So what is it that we want? We want compassion, satisfaction. That is the goal. We want to enjoy the work we're doing. We want to wake up every day and think, I am excited about going to work and doing good things in the world. We want to develop a tolerance and readiness for other people's distress. If other people are upset in our presence, we want to be able to deal with that and have the emotional reserves that we need. We want to be able to express our own feelings, even if those feelings are really intense. We want to be able to have the emotional capacity to deal with those. And we won't be able to unless we have taken the time to recharge our emotional battery on a regular basis. All right, well, thank you again for taking the time to watch this. And I would like to remind you that there are 2 ways to access our free community trainings for Mendocino, Lake, and Humboldt counties. You can go to the training link on the RCS website. There's redwoodcommunityservices.org. Or you can email the training department if you would like us to come do a free in-person training according to your timetable at your facility. Please contact us. You can email us at that email address, or you can call us, and we would be delighted to come out and help you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. That was excellent. Fantastic.